They buried my father on a cold, cloudless morning. The Arizona sun felt too bright for grief, too proud for mourning. I stood there in my navy dress, one I'd picked just for him, quiet, respectful, strong. My hand rested on the old wood of his casket before they lowered him into the ground, next to the tree he planted when I was born. People came and went, neighbors, old ranch hands, even some distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. They all said the same thing. He was a good man. He loved this land. He was proud of you, Nora. I nodded, smiled, thanked them. But something in my chest felt tight, like there was more to say that no one wanted to say out loud. James, my older brother, stood apart. He always had. His suit looked expensive, dark and heavy against the dry red dirt. When the service ended, he clapped his hands like a man closing a deal. "Well," he said to the small group that remained, "there's no will. Dad never got around to it. So, as next of kin, I'll be taking care of the estate." I froze. Aunt May blinked. "No will?" James shrugged. "He talked about it, sure. But legally there's nothing filed. Everything falls to me." I opened my mouth, closed it again. Because I remembered. I remembered our father sitting at the kitchen table with papers. I remembered him saying he wanted things fair, split evenly between us. I remembered him telling me he was taking care of it. But I hadn't seen anything official. James turned to me with that same thin smile he wore as a boy when he stole the last cookie. "You're welcome to stay in the guest house for now, Nora. We'll sort things out later." My cheeks flushed, not from heat, but from humiliation. He was dismissing me, at our father's funeral, in front of our neighbors. I forced a nod. "Sure, we'll talk." He walked away, shaking hands, thanking people like the land had already changed hands. I walked to the fence, shade, where the sun couldn't burn through the ache in my chest. I didn't cry. Not yet. My father wouldn't have liked that. A few moments later, I felt a light touch on my elbow. I turned. It was Mr. Benson, our neighbor from 2 ranches over. White hair, sharp eyes, and a voice like sandpaper. "Sorry for your loss," he said gently. "Thank you." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Nora, I'm not trying to stir anything up, but your daddy talked about his lawyer a lot the last few months." I blinked. "His lawyer?" He nodded. "Said he wanted things locked down right. Said he didn't want no trouble between you and James." I swallowed. "Do you know the lawyer's name?" He shook his head. "Didn't catch it, but he seemed serious. Said he already signed something." My stomach turned. If Dad had already signed something, why was James saying there was no will? I glanced toward my brother. He was laughing with the preacher, holding a glass of sweet tea like nothing had happened. That knot in my chest twisted tighter. I thanked Mr. Benson and made my way back to the house. My hands were steady, but my heart was not. In the kitchen, I stared at the table where Dad used to sit, reading the paper, drinking black coffee, circling tools and catalogs he'd never buy. I reached up into the cabinet above the fridge. That's where he used to hide things from us kids. Candy, Christmas presents, once even a live turtle he rescued from the highway. Now it was empty. In his office, things felt wrong. Too neat. Too erased. His desk drawers were unlocked. Unusual. The fireproof safe stood open. Empty. I stood there, trying not to imagine my brother, digging through the man's life before the body was even in the ground. On the bookshelf, tucked behind his old Western novels, I found a cigar box. Inside were photos. One caught my eye. Dad, smiling, standing beside a man in a beige suit. On the B, in my father's handwriting, Me. Gerald Wallace. Good man. Trustworthy. I sat down slowly, heart racing. Gerald Wallace. That had to be him. The lawyer. I clutched the photo like it might speak. I didn't know who Gerald Wallace was, or where to find him, but I knew one thing. My brother was lying, and my father didn't raise me to be fooled. The phone rang in the kitchen. I didn't move. Outside, the sun was sinking low behind the hills. I stood, walked back toward the porch. And that's when I heard it again. James's voice, drifting from the barn where he thought no one was listening. Doesn't matter what she thinks, he said. She has nothing. It's mine now. The reply was muffled, probably his friend Carl. James laughed. She'll be gone by winter. She can't run this place. Never could. I turned back toward the house, gripping the photo tighter. I didn't need to run the ranch. I just needed the truth. And something told me I was closer than he thought. The next morning, I packed a small bag and slipped the photo into it. At breakfast, James offered me coffee like nothing had happened. You sure you're okay here alone today? He asked. I smiled sweetly. I'll manage. He kissed my cheek and walked out. And for the first time since the funeral, I let myself breathe. Because I had a name. I had a photo. And I had a feeling my father hadn't left me empty-handed. That afternoon, I drove into town. Just as I was stepping out of my truck, I heard someone call my name. It was Mrs. Lopez from the church. She gave me a quick hug, then leaned in. Your daddy talked about his lawyer almost every Sunday before he passed, she whispered. Said he was putting everything in place. I looked into her eyes. Do you know the name? She smiled. Gerald Wallace. He's got an office near Main Street, behind the hardware store. My heart skipped. That made 3 people now. 3 people who remembered what my father had said. I turned toward my truck, sliding behind the wheel. I hadn't seen a will, but I'd seen enough lies. I started the end, Jean. And in the rearview mirror, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. James, watching me from the porch, but this time, I didn't flinch. I drove toward town, toward answers. Because if my father had trusted someone, I was going to find him, and when I did, I'd ask the only question that mattered. Did my father leave something behind? Because if he had, my brother was about to have a problem. The house felt hollow. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was emptied, like someone had taken the air out of the rooms. I stepped into Dad's study again, slower this time, eyes sharper. It wasn't just neat, it was wrong. His desk drawers, always messy, full of receipts, pens, gum wrappers, were wiped clean. No folders, no sticky notes, no coffee rings. His chair, pushed in too tightly. The top drawer didn't even squeak anymore. He never oiled it. Something was off. I crouched down near the file cabinet. The labels were gone. Blank tabs now stared back at me. I opened the middle drawer. Empty. Dad never threw out paperwork. He kept every document, even grocery lists from years ago. He said it was the librarian in me that rubbed off on him. So where was everything? Footsteps creaked in the hallway. I stood quickly as James appeared in the doorway, mug in hand. You looking for something? He asked casually. I was just remembering, I said, keeping my tone light. He nodded, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Figured you'd be poking around. Why's that? He leaned against the door frame. Because I know how your brain works. You think Dad left you something, but he didn't. We talked. He wanted everything kept simple, clean, no messes. My throat tightened. He always told me he was writing things down. He even said he was talking to someone about it. James shrugged. Maybe he was planning to, But if he never signed anything, then it doesn't matter now, does it? His smile didn't reach his eyes. You know how he was. Big talk, never finished half the stuff he started. I folded my arms. That's not how I remember him. He stepped into the room, looked around, then laughed. Well, memory's tricky that way. I stayed quiet, watching him. He picked up a small wooden box from the shelf and opened it. Empty. Closed it again. I cleared out some of the junk. Figured it, did he help? Without asking? He raised a brow. You're a guest here, Nora, not the homeowner. That landed like a slap. I bit my tongue as he walked out, still sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. When I was sure he was gone, I sat down in Dad's chair. And that's when the memories came, uninvited, but clear. Dad at the dinner table, scratching notes in the margins of a newspaper. You know, Nora, he'd said one night, I don't want you and James to fight when I'm gone. I want to make it all fair. I'm working with someone to set things up. I remembered smiling, brushing mashed potatoes onto my plate. Like a will? He'd nodded. Something like that. Gerald's helping. Gerald who? He'd waved it off. You'll know if you ever need to. But I hadn't thought much of it. Not until now. Back in the study, I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. One James must have missed. Inside were old receipts, envelopes, and a dusty cigar box. My heart jumped. I reached in and pulled it out. Old keys, a dried four-leaf clover, and a stack of photographs. I flipped through them, one by one. Pictures of Dad and James fixing the fence. One of me and Dad when I was 7, holding a fish almost bigger than me. And then, there it was. A photo I didn't recognize. Dad, standing beside a man in a beige blazer. Both were smiling. Behind them was a wooden door with gold lettering, Gerald Wallace, attorney at law. My breath caught. I flipped the photo over. In Dad's handwriting, Gerald me, trust this man. Trust, noted, underlined. I stared at the photo, my pulse quickening. James had looked me in the eye and said there was nothing, that Dad never followed through, that it all just defaulted. But here was proof, a connection. I placed the photo in my lap and sat back in the chair, letting my eyes scan the room. James was rewriting the story, piece by piece, taking out pages, pretending the past was dust. But Dad wouldn't have trusted a lawyer, let alone written that note, if nothing had been put in place. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, scanning titles. Ranching manuals, Western novels, a Bible with pages so soft they folded like silk. I opened it. Nothing tucked inside. But on the inside of the back cover, something caught my eye. Barely visible pencil lines. I squinted. A phone number. And next to it, the name Wallace. I ran my fingers over the numbers. The last 4 digits were smudged, but I had enough to start. Down the hall, I heard James on the phone. His voice was low but sharp. I told you, she doesn't have anything. Stop worrying. I've got it under control. I closed the Bible and slipped the photo into my pocket. That knot in my stomach tightened, but it wasn't fear. It was focus. I walked down the hallway and out the side door, not saying a word. Outside, the Arizona wind carried dust across the porch. I watched it swirl in the air. I used to chase that dust as a child, pretending it was magic. Dad would laugh and say, "You're always looking for signs, Nora." Maybe now I had one. Because this wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about truth. And if my brother had buried something, I was going to dig it up. Hayut. Starting with the name, Gerald Wallace. Because lies may settle like dust, but the truth leaves a trail. I hadn't been to that side of town in years. Past the newer strip malls and freshly paved streets, the road turned to gravel, and the buildings grew older, quieter, sun-faded. The law office sat between a shuttered pharmacy and a forgotten feed store. Faded green shutters framed the dusty windows. A bronze plate near the door read, Wallace Wallace, Attorneys at Law. Est, 1971. I parked, gripping the photo tighter in my pocket, the one with Dad and Mr. Wallace smiling under that very sign. Something about the smile, Dad's, felt more real than anything James had said in days. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside. The lobby was dim and smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil. Wood-paneled walls, worn carpet, and a single humming lamp gave the place the kind of warmth I didn't expect. A receptionist looked up, early 70s, glasses on a chain. "Can I help you, dear?" "I'd like to speak to Mr. Gerald Wallace," I said. "I believe he knew my father, Thomas Green." She tilted her head, then nodded slowly. "One moment." A few minutes later, a door creaked open. He was older than I imagined, white hair combed straight back, walking stick in hand. But when his eyes met mine, I saw it, sharp as ever. "Miss Green?" "Yes, Nora." He motioned toward his office. "Come in, please." I followed him inside. The office was neater than Dad's ever was. Stacks of books and files, but all organized. He sat behind the desk with effort, then rested both hands on his cane. "You look like your father," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "I've been told. He was a good man, and he spoke of you often, said you were the one with the mind like a vault." I sat down. "Then I suppose you know why I'm here?" He nodded. "The will." My heart skipped. "You have it?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. He hesitated. "Your father came to see me 3 months before his passing. He wanted to update everything, make sure his wishes were protected." My hands gripped the armrest. "He didn't trust the family situation," Wallace continued carefully. "He was clear about what he wanted. The ranch to be divided equally, certain assets protected in your name." I felt tears press behind my eyes. That sounds like him. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. I drafted the documents. We went over them together in this room. He was thorough, clear. But he opened the folder, revealing several crisp pages with typed text and legal headers. He said he needed to think on it one more night. Said he'd sign them and bring them back. And he didn't, I whispered. Wallace shook his head. "No, not officially." My throat tightened. "But," he said, tapping the desk, "he took the signed copy home. I made him too, in case he wanted to keep one for his records." I blinked. So, he could have signed it, just not here. Exactly. We sat in silence for a moment. Wallace leaned forward. "Nora, your brother came by 2 days after the funeral, told me to destroy any copies, said there was no will, that your father changed his mind." I felt my stomach flip. "And did you?" "I'm a lawyer," he said, straightening. "Not a fool." I exhaled. "I kept everything. Quietly. Just in case someone, like you, came looking." I took a deep breath, heart racing. "Do you have any idea where Dad might have kept the signed copy?" He smiled faintly. "Your father was clever. He didn't like banks. Said they locked away more than just money." "That's true." He stood slowly and walked to a bookshelf behind his desk, slid out a thick ledger, opened it. Inside were notes, appointments, references, initials. He pointed to one. "TG, final sign at home, Red folder. I stared at it. I remember that folder, I said, voice shaking. He kept it in the cabinet beneath the gun safe. Wallace nodded. Then that's where you need to look. I stood. If I find it, the signed one, what happens? Next? Wallace met my eyes. If it's signed and dated, then it stands. We take it to probate court. And James? Well, he said with a dry smile. He won't be smiling for long. I turned to leave, but he stopped me. One more thing. I turned back. There's a line at the bottom of the new will. Your father insisted on writing it himself. He opened the folder and carefully read aloud. Fairness is not always what's expected. It's what's deserved. Nora understands that. My eyes burned. I didn't know he wrote that, I whispered. He meant it. I nodded, barely holding myself together. And then, as I reached the door, Wallace added quietly, unless he gave it to you directly. The ranch house hadn't changed much since Dad passed. Same worn wooden floors, same scent of coffee and leather and desert air. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me like I had 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. He wasn't in the kitchen, humming. He wasn't out back feeding the horses. He was gone. But something of him remained. I could feel it. I walked into his study, where sunlight filtered in through dusty blinds. Bookshelves lined the walls, heavy with Western novels, photo albums, and old tools he refused to throw away. I knew where to look. The red folder Mr. Wallace mentioned. I knelt by the gun cabinet and opened the cabinet beneath it. There were folders inside, loose papers, envelopes, but no red folder. My heart sank. I sat back on my heels. Maybe Wallace was wrong. Maybe James had found it first. Maybe. Then I looked up at the bookshelf. Dad always said, when in doubt, start with the good book. There it was, his old King James Bible, the leather cover worn thin. I reached up and pulled it down. It felt heavier than I remembered. I opened the front cover. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name was written in Dad's handwriting. For Nora, read when the time is right. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a will, handwritten, dated, and signed in black ink. 2 witness signatures at the bottom. It was real. And it was clear. I, Thomas Green, being of sound mind and memory, hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. The rest of the words blurred. My eyes filled with tears. I leave my home, land, and accounts equally to my children, James and Nora. Any previous will is to be considered void. He did include me. He always meant to. A sob rose in my chest, not out of sadness, but relief. I folded the will carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Mr. Wallace looked at it under a desk lamp in his office, reading each line twice, running his fingers over the witness signatures like a jeweler studying a rare gem. Well, he said softly, this changes everything. It's valid? I asked. Signed, dated, witnessed. He tapped the paper. Your father may have been old-fashioned, but he wasn't careless. This holds up. I sat forward, heart pounding. So what happens now? He looked me straight in the eye. We file it in probate court. We do it today. But James said, he raised a hand. Your brother lied. That much is clear. But if he's willing to hide a will, he's willing to do worse. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? Wallace leaned back. You said his behavior's been odd. His tone, his rush to take over the ranch. I've seen this before. If he finds out this will exist before it's legally protected. He didn't finish the sentence. I understood anyway. He could destroy it, I whispered. Or challenge it, or file something false of his own. I nodded slowly. So what do we do? Wallace stood up with surprising energy. We do what your father asked us to. We protect your legacy. He slid the will into a protective case, then into a manila envelope. Let me make copies. Then we take it to the courthouse. As he left the room, I stayed seated, staring out the window. Dad had trusted me. Even in death, he'd left a trail for me to follow. Through grief and confusion, through fam. I waited until the sun was low, when the ranch glowed golden, like it used to when we were kids, and Dad would sit on the porch, humming to the cicadas. It felt like the only time I could still hear his voice. I had the envelope in my purse, the original will, the truth. James was out back, checking on the horses. I waited by the kitchen table until he came in, wiping sweat from his brow, smug and tired. Can we talk? I asked, my voice even. He rolled his eyes like I was a child asking too many questions. If this is about the ranch again, save it. I placed the envelope gently on the table. He looked at it like it was a snake. I found Dad's will, I said, quiet but firm. It was in his Bible, signed, dated, witnessed. He left everything to both of us, equally. James didn't move at first. Then he laughed. A cold, humorless laugh. You expect me to believe that? He said. How convenient that it turns up now. I didn't flinch. I went to Mr. Wallace. He confirmed it. James slammed his fist on the table so hard the salt shaker jumped. That will is fake, Nora. You faked it. I didn't, I said calmly. I wouldn't. He leaned over the table, inches from my face. Dad told me I'd get everything. He made me promise to protect it from you. My heart dropped. That's not true. You were always soft, he sneered. Always sentimental. He didn't trust you with the land. I blinked, stunned, not just by the words, but by the venom in them. I'm not here to fight you, I said slowly. I'm here to offer you fairness. We can file the real will, split things the way Dad wanted. We don't have to go to war. He laughed again, louder this time. It's too late for that. I already filed with the court. I claimed the estate. My stomach turned. When? 2 days after the funeral, he said, shrugging. Didn't waste time. Why should I? You didn't even give me a chance to grieve, I whispered. He shrugged. You should have known better. You've always been blind. I stood up. My hands were trembling, but I wouldn't let him see. Then I'll file the real will. We'll let the judge decide. You do that, James said, crossing his arms. Let's see how well you hold up in court. I stared at him, trying to find even a flicker of the brother I once knew. The boy who used to swing me around in the yard. The teen who punched a bully for teasing me. But there was nothing now. Just stone. I left without another word. The courthouse steps were hot under my feet. I held the file in my arms like a shield, praying I'd done the right thing. Mr. Wallace had already submitted the will to probate, but today, I needed to make a personal appearance. I needed to be seen, heard. As I climbed the steps, I paused. James was there. Not alone. He was speaking to someone in a gray suit, tall, smooth-talking, with slicked-back hair and a thick briefcase. I'd seen him once, years ago, during a messy neighbor dispute. Dad had called him a snake in a tie, said he helped forge documents to transfer land illegally before the courts caught on. I watched as James handed him a folder. My throat went dry. They were planning something bad. I held my file tighter, said a silent prayer to Dad, and kept walking. The courthouse was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. I gripped the folder so tight my fingers ached. Inside was everything that mattered: the handwritten will, the witness statements, the verification from Mr. Wallace. Everything that proved my father's final wishes. Mr. Wallace walked beside me like a shield. Calm. Focused. "Don't let his threats shake you," he said. "This is about facts now, not feelings." But I had feelings. I was shaking inside, even as I nodded. James was my brother, and now we were enemies in a courtroom. As we walked through the security doors and into the probate office, I saw James down the hall. He stood with that same man in the gray suit, the one Dad once warned me about. James saw me and smirked. I didn't flinch. Inside the filing office, Mr. Wallace greeted the clerk with his usual firm but polite tone. He placed the documents on the counter. "We're here to file a will for the estate of Thomas Green," he said. The clerk opened the envelope carefully and looked through it. "Original, handwritten, witnessed," she murmured, flipping each page. "Do you have verification?" Mr. Wallace handed her a sealed envelope. "Two separate handwriting experts reviewed this, and we've included sworn affidavits from the two witnesses, both still living, both able to testify." The clerk looked impressed. "You came prepared." Mr. Wallace didn't blink. "My client's brother filed a false claim. We expect this to be challenged, but this will is valid and legal." The woman nodded. "We'll attach this to the existing estate case. A hearing date will be set shortly." It was done. The papers were in. We left the courthouse in silence, but a weight had shifted. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. We got lunch at a small diner nearby. I stirred my coffee with shaking hands. Mr. Wallace watched me closely. "You did good today," he said. "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "Strength isn't always loud," he replied. "Sometimes it's just showing up with the truth." But his eyes told me something else. He wasn't relaxed. "There's something you're not saying," I pressed. He sighed. "James won't go down without a fight. That man he's working with, I've heard rumors, false witnesses, hidden documents, judges pressured." "Can they really do that?" I whispered. "They can try. That's why we have to stay 10 steps ahead." That evening, I pulled into the driveway at the ranch. I parked by the barn, just like always. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields. I climbed the porch and reached for the screen door. Then I paused. Something was off. I walked back to my chair. At first I couldn't see it. Then the light shifted. Long, deep scratches lined the passenger side. Words, crude, jagged, sharp. "Go back to Phoenix." My breath caught. They knew I'd filed. And now they were warning me. I didn't sleep much that night. The scratches on my car haunted me more than the words themselves. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a message, a warning, a threat meant to rattle me. But instead of fear, I felt something else blooming inside me. Resolve. The next morning, I sat at Dad's old desk. The wood was worn smooth from his hands over the years, the same desk where he wrote the will, and, I now remembered, where he'd sometimes record messages on his phone. He said it helped him think out loud. Something nudged me to check his old voicemail inbox. His phone had been sitting in the drawer since the funeral. I unlocked it with the usual passcode, my birthday. And there it was, a voicemail, dated just 3 days before he passed. With trembling fingers, I hit play. His voice crackled through the speaker, strong but tired. "Hey, sweetheart. I don't know if I'll get to say this in person, so I'm leaving it here. I've updated the will. Gerald's helping with the paperwork. Everything is to be split between you and James, but I want you to know, I trust you with the ranch. You've got the heart for it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If James fights you, don't back down. I'm proud of you. I love you. I sat frozen. Then the tears came, quiet at first, then deep, shaking sobs. I hadn't heard his voice since the funeral, and now it was as if he had reached out through time, through grief, through everything, to give me the strength I needed. I replayed it 3 times. Then I saved it, emailed it to myself, and sent it straight to Mr. Wallace. He called immediately. "This is gold," he said. "We'll submit it to the court as supplemental evidence. It proves intention, and it might just turn the tide." Court was packed that morning. Small-town probate hearings don't usually draw a crowd, but word had spread. Neighbors, old friends, and even the sheriff were there. I sat beside Mr. Wallace, my heart thudding in my ears. James stood at the opposite table, smug in a tailored suit that screamed money he didn't earn. His lawyer, the slick man in gray, whispered in his ear like the devil on his shoulder. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Then it began. James's lawyer spoke first, painting him as the loyal son who stayed behind to take care of the land, who sacrificed everything while his sister ran off to Phoenix. "She was never involved in ranch affairs," the lawyer said. "She has no ties to the community, no understanding of the responsibilities." Mr. Green verbally affirmed many times that his son would inherit the land. I wanted to scream, but I stayed still. Then it was our turn. Mr. Wallace stood slowly, calm as ever. "With your permission, Your Honor," he said, "we would like to enter into evidence a voicemail recording, dated 3 days before Mr. Green's passing." The judge nodded. The room went silent as the audio played. My father's voice filled the courtroom. "Everything is to be split between you and James. I trust you with the ranch. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A quiet gasp rippled through the room. When the message ended, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked ashamed, some surprised. A few nodded, like they'd always known the truth. James shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the smirk was gone. He stood. "That message," he started, "could have been fake." The judge raised a hand. "We verified the voicemail's metadata and cross-referenced it with the decedent's phone records. It's authentic." James's lawyer tried to object, but it was weak, hollow. The judge looked directly at James. "You stated your sister was never meant to have the ranch," she said. James lifted his chin. "That's what my father told me, in private." The judge leaned forward slightly. "We'll see what your father thought." James didn't take his seat again. He stood stiffly, jaw clenched, hands gripping the sides of the defense table like he might crush it. His lawyer whispered something urgently, but he waved him off. He looked at the judge and said loudly, "That voicemail doesn't change what she is." The judge arched an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" James sneered. "She's bitter. She always was. She moved away, never looked back, and now she wants to come here and take everything our father built. She doesn't care about the land. She cares about control." I stayed silent. Let him rant. "I was here," James continued, voice rising. "I stayed. I took care of the house, the bills, the cattle, the fences. I watched him die. She didn't even show up until the funeral. And now she suddenly pulls out a handwritten will?" His voice echoed. Then it cracked. "She doesn't deserve it," he spat. "I earned it." The courtroom was still. Even the ceiling fan sounded too loud. The judge didn't say a word, just looked at him with cool, unreadable eyes. Then she turned to me. "Ms. Green, would you like to respond?" I stood slowly. I didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't have the sharp tongue of a lawyer or the anger of a man backed into a corner, but I had the truth. I loved my father, I said plainly. I moved to Phoenix because my husband got sick. I took care of him until the end. My dad knew that. He called me every Sunday. We talked about the ranch, about James, about everything. I looked at my brother. He told me he was proud of both of us. That's why he wanted us to share it. James scoffed, but the judge silenced him with a glance. I continued. The will was hidden in his Bible. He left it for me. I didn't know it was there until a few days ago. But once I found it, I didn't run. I brought it here. I continued. The will was hidden in his Bible. He left it for me. I didn't know it was there until a few days ago. But once I found it, I didn't run. I brought it here. Mr. Wallace stood up. We've submitted the verified will, the witness statements, the voicemail, and notarized expert reports on the handwriting. All confirm Mr. Green's intent. The judge nodded slowly. I've reviewed them all. She turned to the witness stand. Mr. Gerald Wallace, you were the decedent's attorney. Can you confirm, under oath, that Mr. Green discussed this will with you and intended to make his daughter an equal heir? Mr. Wallace nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He was very clear about his wishes. He said, and I quote, My son's pride will be the problem, but Nora's the one with the patience to protect what I leave behind. A ripple went through the courtroom. The judge looked at the bench where the witnesses had testified. Both had been close friends of my father, one from church, the other from the feed store. They had already confirmed signing the will months before his death. It was all out in the open now. James had nothing left to hide behind. The judge looked at him once more. Mr. Green, do you have any more evidence you'd like to submit? He shook his head, face red. This is ridiculous, he muttered. She ignored the comment. Very well, she said. I'd like to take a short recess. I've made my decision. My heart skipped. The air in the room tightened, and all I could do was wait. The courtroom doors creaked open after recess, and everyone shuffled back to their seats. I sat down slowly, trying to breathe evenly, trying not to guess which way the judge would lean. James didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching in his neck. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't nod. I glanced at Mr. Wallace. He gave me the smallest nod of reassurance, but his hands were folded tight on the table, and that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a done deal yet. The judge entered and took her seat, setting a thick file in front of her. She didn't look up right away. She flipped through a few pages, reading silently. Then she placed her hands flat on the desk. This court has reviewed the submitted documents, she began, her voice calm but firm, including the handwritten will, the attached expert analyses, the verified witness statements, and the audio recording presented during testimony. She paused and looked directly at James. I find the testimony of the petitioner and her legal counsel to be credible. I also find the conduct of the respondent, Mr. James Green, deeply troubling. Based on the evidence, I believe that Mr. Green knowingly withheld and attempted to destroy legal documents in violation of probate law. The silence in the room was sharp. She continued. The court recognizes the handwritten will of Thomas Green as legally valid. Therefore, the estate, consisting of the ranch, assets, and financial accounts, shall be split evenly between the named heirs, Nora Green and James Green. I heard a breath catch in the gallery behind me. Mine? Maybe. My heart was pounding too loud to tell. The judge wasn't done. Additionally, she said, Mr. James Green is fined for obstruction and will be required to pay court fees for both parties. There was a sharp clatter. James had pushed back his chair. He stood, fists balled, red rising in his face. This is garbage, he growled. The judge didn't flinch. Mr. Green, you are dismissed. Any further outbursts, and I will hold you in contempt." James turned to me, eyes full of something I couldn't even name anymore. Not just anger, not just hate. Loss. But he said nothing, just turned and stormed out of the courtroom, his boots slammin', G against the marble like a gavel of his own. I didn't chase him. I didn't speak. I simply stood, collected the documents, and nodded to Mr. Wallace. It was over. Not perfectly, not clean, but over. Back at the ranch, the wind was softer than I remembered. I parked the car slowly and walked up the front steps, the sun dipping low behind the barn. The house smelled like old books and cedar wood, like him. I didn't turn on the lights. I just wandered to the living room and sat in his old recliner. The leather still held his shape. I exhaled deeply and let the silence settle. Then I leaned forward. Something shifted under the chair. I reached beneath it and felt an edge. A worn envelope, sealed. My name written in bold, shaky handwriting. For Nora. After the dust settles. The envelope felt warm in my hands, like it had been waiting. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the coffee table, made myself tea, and sat for a long while in silence. The house creaked with old sounds. The wind whispered through the kitchen window, just slightly cracked. When I finally opened it, the paper inside was worn but neat. His handwriting was slow, deliberate. Nora, if you're reading this, then it means the fight I hoped we could avoid has come to pass. I'm sorry. I should have done more. I should have sent the will directly to the court, but I trusted James would do the right thing. That was my mistake. But you? You were always the one who showed up. You stayed when things were hard. You listened when no one else did. You took care of your mother, of me, of this land. You never asked for more than your share, and that's how I always knew you deserved it all the more. This land is a part of you, so if they ever try to take it, don't let them. This place remembers you, and I know you'll remember what it stands for. With love, always, Dad. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there. A long silence passed through me, like breath. Then I stood. I found the old property deed in the drawer beneath his gun cabinet. I drove to the courthouse the next morning and stood at the Arcay's window. "I'd like to add my name," I said, voice steady. It took an hour, some paperwork, a stamp, a signature. Then, just like that, it was real. Nora Green, co-owner. I stepped out into the sunlight holding the deed, but it felt like I was holding something older, something my father placed into my hands from beyond time. That weekend, I painted the gate, white again, just like it was when I was little. The same way Dad liked it. The creak of the wood, the smell of fresh paint, the feel of the bristles brushing away what was old. It all felt like healing. Not fast, not flashy, just true. I trimmed the hedges, pulled weeds from the garden, and laid new soil where the marigolds used to grow. My hands ached, but my heart didn't. The neighbors began to wave again. Some stopped by. Some brought pies or stories. Most just smiled. One afternoon, I opened the gate for a group of local kids riding bikes down the dirt path. They were sweaty, hungry, and full of laughter. "Y'all want lemonade?" I asked. They nodded, wide-eyed and hopeful. I set out chairs. I poured drinks. I handed out slices of my mother's old pound cake recipe, the one she used for birthdays, and I told them stories. About the horses that once ran here, about the thunderstorm that knocked out the barn roof in '92, about my father's voice yelling across the field when dinner was ready. They listened. They laughed. They stayed. It reminded me of something my dad once said, long ago, When I asked him why he kept the ranch open to everyone even when money was tight, he'd said, "Because land means nothing if no one feels welcome on it." And now I understood. James never came back, not to the house, not to apologize. I heard he moved north, took a job in a town where no one knew him. Maybe he thought starting over was easier than facing what he did. Maybe he was right. But I didn't carry bitterness. Not anymore. The land didn't want it. This place wanted hands in the soil, quiet mornings, and stories told over fences. One morning, as I looked out over the fields, sun spilling like gold across the ridge, I whispered, "We're okay now, Dad." The wind didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Everything he left for me was already speaking. In the swing of the barn door, in the gate I painted white, in the names on the paper, and in the kids who now called me Miss Nora and asked for second slices of cake. He hid the will, but my father left something stronger, the truth. And now it's written in ink, land, and legacy.